The morning Senna Ashwood turned 15 years old, her father did not come home from the forest. She remembered waiting by the kitchen window, watching snow fall in the gray hours before dawn. There were no honey cakes this year, no promises about teaching her winter sherbs. She was 15 now, old enough to understand that birthdays were luxuries her life as a servant could not afford. But her father had promised to meet her before his patrol, had promised they would at least share breakfast together before she began her day's work. The breakfast grew cold on the table. Her father never came. They found him 3 days later at the edge of Thornmere Forest, half buried in snow that had fallen soft and relentless through the nights of searching. Senna was not allowed to see the body. She was told this was a kindness. She was told many things in the days that followed, none of them true, all of them designed to shape her grief into something small and manageable that would not disturb the careful order of Stonehaven Keep. They told her it was an accident, that her father had gotten lost, that the cold had taken him quickly and without pain. They did not tell her why the elder wolves exchanged glances over his body, why Council Head Corwin arrived at the forest clearing and stood very still, looking at Beta Ashwood's frozen form with an expression Senna was old enough to recognize as guilt poorly disguised, why her father's study was cleared out within hours, his papers and books disappearing into council archives, where a 15-year-old servant girl had no access and no standing to demand answers. They buried him on the 4th day. The entire pack attended because that was protocol when a Beta died. Senna stood at the graveside in the same black dress she had worn to her mother's grave when she was too young to remember, altered now to fit her growing frame, and she understood with the clarity that sometimes comes in moments of terrible loss that she was truly alone now in a way that could not be fixed. She had been alone since birth, really. Her mother, Alara, had died bringing her into the world, a tragedy the pack spoke of in whispers when they thought she could not hear. Natural complications, they said, the price of childbirth. Senna had grown up motherless, raised by her father's careful hands and the indifferent charity of the keep's servants. And now her father was gone too. After the burial, she walked to the edge of the forest by herself. Not to the place where they found her father, somewhere else. A clearing she had discovered years ago when she was 7 or 8, a place where the snow lay undisturbed and the pine trees grew close together, and she could sit with her back against rough bark and let herself feel without witnesses. She had been coming to this place for years, ever since the raven first appeared. Senna had been 7 years old, grieving a mother she had never known, when the raven dropped out of the sky and landed on her knee. No warning, no circling. One moment the air above her was empty. The next moment an enormous black bird was folding wings as dark as the spaces between stars, regarding her with eyes the precise color of amber held up to afternoon light. It should not have landed on her. Wild birds did not land on people, but it sat there anyway, solid and warm and real, and when she reached out with trembling fingers to touch it, it did not fly away. The raven had stayed with her for 8 years. Through her father's long silences and his secret investigations she did not understand, through the pack's indifference and her own careful cultivation of invisibility, through every lonely night and difficult day. And now, standing in the clearing where she had first met the bird, Senna waited for it to come. It dropped from the gray winter sky without warning, just as it had 8 years ago, settled on her shoulder with familiar weight. And this time when she pressed her face against its feathers and wept, it made a soft sound she had never heard before, something between grief and promise. The raven understood. It had always understood. What Senna did not understand was why it had chosen her, or what it was waiting for. 7 years later, Senna Ashwood was still invisible. She had perfected it into an art form. She knew how to move through Stonehaven Keep like a breath of air, present enough to complete her tasks, absent enough that no one registered her as a person with thoughts or feelings or a right to space. She knew how to keep her eyes down and her voice soft and her entire self folded inward like a letter no one had ever opened. The trick was not to feel the humiliation as it was happening. The trick was to let it pass over you the way cold water passes over a stone in a river. Smooth and impersonal. And then later, alone in the small room at the back of the servants' quarters, she could let herself feel it. She could press her face into the rough pillow and let the feeling move through her like a storm. And then it would be gone, and she would be ready to begin again. Most of the time it worked. On the morning that would change everything, Senna was carrying a basket of fresh linens through the main corridor leading to the Great Hall when Isolde Raven appeared with her usual entourage of silk-clad women who moved through the world like they owned every room they entered. The corridor had been swept clean that morning. Senna had been the one to sweep it, working in the gray hours before dawn when the stone floors seemed to breathe with cold that went all the way to the bone. She had taken pride in the work, the way she took pride in all her work, because competence was the only currency she had, and she spent it carefully. Isolde did not break stride. She simply walked forward with the absolute certainty that the world would rearrange itself to accommodate her. Because in Senna's experience, that was exactly what the world did for women like Isolde Raven. Senna pressed herself against the wall. The basket caught on a torch bracket. The linen spilled across the clean floor in a cascade of white fabric that looked, for one terrible moment, like snow falling on the day they buried her father. Isolde stepped over them without looking down. Her pale gown dragged across the white fabric. Her women followed, a river of expensive cloth and expensive perfume and expensive indifference. None of them looked at Senna, but then they never did. Senna crouched to gather the linens, her hands steady because she had learned to keep her hands steady years ago, and she was reaching for the last corner of fabric when she heard the sound. Not quite a caw, not quite anything that belonged to a normal bird. A sound that lives somewhere between acknowledgement and warning, low and resonant, and coming from directly above her head. She looked up. The raven was perched on the window ledge, silhouetted against morning light, watching her with those amber eyes that had watched her for 15 years, waiting with the patience of something very old that understood time differently than wolves or humans or anything else that measured its life in the passing of seasons. "I know," Senna said quietly, so quietly that no one else in the corridor would hear. "It doesn't matter." The raven ruffled its feathers. The gesture, Senna had learned over the years, meant something like disagreement, or perhaps just attention. The raven's language was not made of words, but she had become fluent in it anyway. She stood up with the basket, walked down the corridor, felt the raven's gaze between her shoulder blades like a warm hand pressing gently forward, the way it always did, the way it had done every day for 15 years, steady and certain and absolutely unexplained. The keep had been in a state of sustained commotion for 3 days. Alphaking Corvain was returning. After 3 years fighting in the Shadow Territories, 3 years of war that had cost Stonehaven more blood than Senna could easily account for, the king was finally coming home. The news had arrived with riders from the northern border, and within hours the entire keep transformed into a hive of frantic preparation. Senna observed it all from the edges. That was where she lived, in the margins and doorways and service corridors, watching the machinery of power and politics turn without ever being part of it herself. She learned things this way. When you were invisible, people spoke freely around you, and people speaking freely revealed a great deal. She learned that Council Head Corwin had spent the last 2 years positioning his daughter Isolde as the obvious choice for queen, that the choosing ceremony would take place within 2 weeks of the king's return because the pack needed an heir and the political situation demanded stability, that Corvain had left for war unmarked and unmated, which was unusual for an alpha, and that his return was causing speculation about whether he would choose based on political advantage or personal preference. She learned these things while refilling wine and clearing plates and standing very still in corners of rooms where important people discussed important matters. She learned them and filed them away and told herself they had nothing to do with her, because the romantic arrangements of royalty very definitively did not concern servants who swept corridors and folded linens and kept their eyes down. On the morning of Corvain's arrival, Senna was assigned to the upper gallery. Someone needed to stand there with a tray of wine for the lords and ladies who would position themselves along the stone railing to witness the Alpha King's entrance into the courtyard below. The someone who got assigned tasks no one else wanted was reliably Senna. She did not mind. The upper gallery was actually one of her favorite places in Stonehaven Keep. A long corridor of carved stone arches that looked out over the entire courtyard, and beyond it the dark line of Thornmire Forest and the mountains beyond that, and on clear days like this one, the distant suggestion of frozen peaks that marked the true northern border. She set up the tray on a small table, stepped back against the wall, waited while lords and ladies filed in around her in their expensive clothes with their loud voices, creating a wall of silken status that she stood behind because that was where servants belonged. No one looked at her. No one ever looked at her. And that was fine. That was safe. That was exactly what she had spent years cultivating. Then the outer gates opened, and Corvain Thornfield rode through them on a black horse so enormous it seemed less like an animal and more like a force of nature that had temporarily agreed to be contained in the shape of a horse. The effect on the assembled pack was immediate and physical, a collective drawing in of breath, a straightening of spines, a pressure behind the sternum that Senna felt even from the gallery above. even through stone and distance and all the careful walls she had built around herself. She had not expected that, had not expected to feel anything at all. She remembered Corvain's ascension ceremony years ago only as a blur of cold formal words and the strange electric sensation that moved through the gathered pack when a new alpha claimed his power. She felt it now, stronger, closer, undeniable. Corvain rode without ceremony and without the kind of performance lesser powerful men often substituted for actual authority. No raised sword, no theatrical acknowledgement of the crowd. He simply rode through the gates and into the courtyard, and the pack responded to his presence the way iron responds to a magnet. Involuntarily, completely, Senna took a small step backward. Not because anyone was pressing forward, but because her body was responding to something her mind had not yet processed, and the response felt too large to contain while standing still. The lords and ladies around her were murmuring, excited commentary about the king's return, about how well he looked, about the scars visible on his hands where his gloves did not quite cover them, about what it meant that he had come back alive when so many others had not. Senna was not listening to them. She was watching the king's face, or trying to. He was too far away to see clearly from the gallery, just a silhouette of dark hair and darker clothing, and the kind of stillness that came from people who had learned to conserve movement, because movement could mean the difference between living and dying. Then he looked up at the gallery, a slight tilt of his head, his gaze moving along the assembled lords and ladies with the efficiency of someone cataloging rather than admiring, measuring, assessing, and his gaze stopped. Senna was not standing with the lords and ladies. She was standing several feet back from the railing, in the shadow of a stone arch, holding an empty tray because the wine was still on the table and no one had asked for any yet. There were dozens of people in the gallery. The probability that he was looking at her specifically was overwhelmingly against it. But the raven dropped out of nowhere. One moment the air was empty. The next moment the raven was settling on her shoulder with the weight and warmth that was deeply familiar, folding those enormous black wings, turning its amber eyes toward the courtyard below. Several of the lords and ladies near Senna recoiled with exclamations of surprise and distaste. Someone made a sharp remark about the inappropriateness of a raven in the gallery. Someone else waved their hand, trying to shoo it away. The raven ignored all of them with the profound indifference it had demonstrated toward everyone who was not Senna for the past 15 years. And down in the courtyard, Senna saw with a clarity she could not account for, Alphaking Corvain's expression shift. Not into disgust or surprise, into something else. Something that looked almost like recognition. He did not look away. The lords and ladies were still making remarks about the bird, about its size, about how servants should not be allowed in formal spaces if they attracted wild animals, about the general decline in standards since the war began. Senna stood very still. She had learned long ago that drawing additional attention to herself when she was already receiving unwanted attention was never a useful strategy. She looked at the tray in her hands. She looked at the stone floor. She looked anywhere except at the Alpha King, who was still, inexplicably, undeniably looking at her. The raven clicked its beak once. The sound carried in the sudden quiet. A sound that Senna privately interpreted as something between satisfaction and inevitability. "That animal should not be in here," said Lord Harwick, a broad-shouldered elder wolf with gray at his temples and the permanent expression of someone on the verge of being offended by something. Somebody remove it. Nobody moved to remove it. Nobody in the gallery wanted to be the person who tried to grab a raven currently attached to the shoulder of a servant on behalf of a lord who was only their equal at a moment when the Alpha King had just ridden through the gate and might require wine at any second. Senna appreciated the political calculus even as she tried to project absolute insignificance. The raven stayed exactly where it was. Below in the courtyard, Corvain finally looked away. He dismounted with the fluid economy of someone who had spent years in the saddle, disappeared into the keep with his head guard and a cluster of advisors. The moment broke. The assembled lords and ladies turned away from the railing, their attention shifting to the question of who would get the best position at tonight's welcome feast. Senna waited until they filed out of the gallery, set down the tray, walked back to the servants' quarters with the raven still on her shoulder, a warm, solid weight that had never felt heavier or more like a question she did not know how to answer. She was in the kitchen garden the next morning, cutting herbs for the cook, when she heard footsteps that did not belong. Senna had been in Stonehaven Keep long enough to know footsteps. She knew the slightly dragging step of old Marta, the head cook, the quick light steps of the kitchen girl Pen, the deliberate measured pace of head housekeeper Dorwin. She did not know these footsteps. These footsteps belonged to someone large and moving with the controlled economy that came from years of combat training. Quiet not because they were trying to be quiet, but because quiet movement was their default state. She straightened slowly, turned around with the bundle of rosemary and thyme in her hands. Alpha King Corvain stood at the garden entrance. He was not wearing the formal regalia from yesterday's arrival. He was wearing dark traveling clothes and a heavy cloak, and his hair was not arranged but simply loose around his face. He looked, Senna thought, with a disorientation she struggled to conceal, surprisingly like a person. Not a title, not a silhouette. A person standing in a frost-covered kitchen garden in early morning light, looking at her with gray eyes that were gray because she was close enough to see them now, which was a proximity she had not anticipated and was not sure what to do with. "You're the woman with the raven," he said, not a question, a statement delivered in a voice that was lower and quieter than she expected, with an edge of something she could not quite identify. Exhaustion, maybe, or curiosity, or both. "I am," Senna said, because there was no other answer available, and lying to an alpha was both impossible and inadvisable. He was quiet for a moment, looking at her in that same way he had looked at her from the courtyard. Actually looking, not the way most people in positions of power looked at people in positions like hers, which was to say, not really looking at all, just processing visual information about the space around them. He was seeing her. She did not know what he was finding. She was aware that she was holding herbs and probably had frost in her hair and was absolutely not dressed for an encounter with anyone, let alone the sovereign of her pack. She made herself stand still anyway because running was not an option and composure was the only thing she had reliably available. "What is your name?" he said. "Senna," she said. "Senna Ashwood." Something shifted in his expression, just slightly. Just enough that she noticed it and then immediately questioned whether she had actually noticed it or simply hoped she had. "Ashwood," he said. The name carried weight in his mouth. Deliberate weight. "Your father was Beta Ashwood." "Yes," Senna said. "He died 7 years ago." "I know who your father was," Corvain said quietly. The words hit her like cold water, because no one in 7 years had said that to her with the particular weight he put on it. The weight of someone for whom this information was not incidental but central. Not background noise, but signal. The frost lay white and still on the garden walls around them. The morning was very quiet. Something was happening that Senna did not yet have the framework to understand, but she felt it anyway. Felt it in the space between his words and in the way the raven, absent until this moment, landed without warning on the stone wall beside her and folded its wings and watched the Alpha King with amber eyes that held something very old. "The raven," Corvain said after a moment. "How long has it followed you?" "Since I was young," Senna said. "Since before my father died." He nodded slowly. The nod of someone receiving information they had been waiting for without quite knowing they were waiting for it. "Has it ever landed on anyone else?" he asked. "No," Senna said. He looked at the raven. The raven looked back. Then Corvain's gaze returned to Senna, and in it she saw something she had not expected to see in the eyes of someone so far above her station. She saw exhaustion and grief and the kind of bone-deep weariness that came from carrying weight for too long without setting it down. "I would like to speak with you, Ben," he said. "Not here, somewhere private." Every instinct Senna had developed over years of survival screamed that private conversations with powerful men were dangerous, that agreeing to this was a mistake, that the safe choice was to decline politely and return to her work and let whatever this was pass by the way she let everything else pass by. But he had said her father's name like it mattered, like Beta Ashwood was a person he remembered rather than a name in old records. And Senna had spent 7 years not asking questions about her father's death because asking questions was dangerous and she was trying to survive. She was so tired of just surviving. "When?" she said. "Tonight," he said. "After the evening meal. Do you know the old reading room on the east wing, 3rd floor?" "Yes," Senna said. Everyone who worked in the keep knew every room in the keep. "Come there," he said. And then he turned and walked back through the garden entrance with those quiet, controlled steps. And Senna stood in the cold air and the frost and stared at the place where he had been and tried to decide if she had just agreed to something she should not have agreed to. The raven clicked its beak. She looked at it. It looked at her with those impossible amber eyes that had watched her for 15 years, that had been there the day her father left for the forest and never came back, and had never, not once, led her toward harm. "Yes," she said quietly. "I know." That evening, Senna waited until the great hall was full of noise and wine and politics before slipping through the side passage and climbing the narrow stairs to the east wing. Her heart was doing something uncharacteristic in her chest, something that felt too large and too fast and entirely unwelcome. The third-floor corridor was lit by widely spaced torches, their light dim and amber, the shadows between them thick enough to feel solid. The old reading room had been out of use for years, its shelves still full of books and scrolls from an earlier era of scholarship that the current pack did not have much interest in. It was a quiet, overlooked place that smelled of old paper and cold stone, and the particular dusty sweetness of books that had not been opened in a long time. She pushed the door open, stepped inside. Corvain was already there, standing at the far wall, looking at books on the shelves with his arms folded across his chest. He turned when she came in with the easy situational awareness of someone who always knew where the door was. He had a lamp on the table. The light from it was warmer than the corridor outside, and in it she could see him more clearly. The lines of his face that were not unkind, but were not easy either. The gray eyes that seemed to think before they showed anything. The shadows under those eyes that spoke of too many nights without sleep. "You came," he said. "You asked," Senna said. He looked at her for a moment, and something that might have been the beginning of a real expression moved across his face. Something that, in different circumstances on a different person, might have been a smile. "Sit down," he said, "please." She did, taking the chair on one side of the table. He sat across from her, and the lamp made a small, warm island of light between them. And outside the narrow windows, the night was full of wind from the mountains, deep and cold and constant. "Your father," Corvain said without preamble. "What do you know about how he died?" The question was so direct it took her breath. No careful approach, no gentle leading, just the question itself, stark and unavoidable. "Very little," Senna said. Her voice was steady, which surprised her. "I was 15. They told me it was an accident, that he had gone into the forest and gotten lost, and the cold had taken him. But the way the elder wolves looked at each other over his body told me that was not the complete story." She paused. The lamp flame did not waver. Corvain's gaze did not shift. "It has never been the complete story," she said. "No," Corvain said. "It was not." The room was very quiet. The wind moved outside the windows like something alive and patient. Senna kept her hands folded in her lap and her breathing even, and waited, because she had spent years learning to wait for things, and this felt like the thing she had been waiting for all along, without knowing it. "There are things I need to tell you," Corvain said slowly, choosing words with the deliberateness of someone navigating terrain where they knew there were hidden obstacles. "Things about your father, about your family, about why that raven follows you." He leaned forward slightly, elbows on the table. "But before I tell you those things, I need you to understand something. The war in the Shadow Territories. Everyone believes it was about border disputes and territory expansion. That was what the Council had told the Pack, and it was not entirely untrue. But it was not the whole truth either." He paused. "I went to war to find answers," he said. "The Shadow Territories have archives. Records that go back further than ours do, preserved in ways we lost centuries ago. I spent 3 years fighting for access to those archives. I lost good wolves. I lost my brother." His voice caught slightly on the last word, barely perceptible, but Senna heard it. "And I found what I was looking for." "What were you looking for?" Senna asked. "The truth about keepers," he said. The word landed between them like a stone dropped into still water. Senna had never heard it before. Not in this context, not said like it was important. "What is a keeper?" she said. Corvain looked at her for a long moment. Then he said, "You are." And everything Senna thought she knew about herself shifted like ground beneath her feet during an earthquake. Familiar terrain suddenly unreliable. The foundations of her understanding cracking open to reveal something she had never suspected lay beneath. "In the oldest traditions of the northern wolf packs," Corvain said, "a keeper is someone with specific bloodline characteristics that allow them to interface with protective forces bound to the pack's territory. Forces that in later centuries the pack stopped believing in and therefore stopped acknowledging, even though those forces did not stop existing simply because the belief stopped." He gestured toward the window, toward the invisible territory beyond it. "One of those forces," he said, "presents as a raven." Senna felt the words settle into her bones, felt them arrive in a place where questions she had carried for 15 years suddenly had shape and substance, and answers that made terrible perfect sense. "You are saying," she said carefully, "that the raven is not simply a bird that chose to follow me." "No," Corvain said. It is something old and bound to this land and looking for its keeper. When your mother died, it found you, the next person in the bloodline. He leaned forward further, gray eyes steady and serious and completely focused on her. Your mother carried this bloodline, Senna. She was a keeper, the most gifted one in generations according to the records I found. And your father, though he did not carry keeper abilities himself, spent his entire life trying to understand what your mother was, what you were meant to become. The room was very quiet. The lamp cast steady light. Senna pressed her palms flat against the table, kneading the solid reality of wood grain under her hands, while her mind tried to reorganize itself around this new version of her own history. Who, she said, who found this threatening? I have strong suspicions, Corvain said. I do not yet have proof I can act on. That is part of why I am telling you this. I need you to understand what you are before I can begin to address what was done to your parents. Because the two things are connected, and you are walking through this keep every day without understanding that you carry something certain people here find very dangerous. Dangerous how? Senna asked. The keeper abilities, when they awaken fully, are not trivial, Corvain said. They are connected to the territorial protections of this land in ways that supersede pack hierarchy. In the oldest traditions, the keeper's consent and cooperation was required for the alpha's authority over the territory to be fully legitimate. It was a check and balance, he paused. It was also, for any alpha or political faction that wanted uncomplicated absolute power, an inconvenience. Senna thought of Council Head Corwin and his carefully constructed political certainty. Thought of the way he had stood at the edge of the forest looking at her father's body with an expression she had been old enough to recognize as guilt. Thought of 7 years of careful invisibility and the deep, unexamined fear she had carried, that asking questions about her father's death would lead somewhere she could not come back from. Why are you telling me this now? She asked. Why not before you left for war? Because I did not know the full extent of it before the war, Corvain said. I knew fragments. I knew there was something wrong about your father's death. I knew the raven that kept appearing to me in battle had to mean something. But I did not have the full picture until I found the records in the Shadow Archives. He looked at her with a directness she was not accustomed to receiving from people in power. The directness of someone who had decided to be honest and was doing it without ceremony or apology. And because the raven would not leave me alone about it, he said. Senna blinked. The raven? It has been appearing to me for the past 3 years, Corvain said. Not settling, not following, just appearing on the battlefield when I was about to make a mistake that would get wolves killed. In my tent the night before my brother died, like it was trying to warn me of something I was too tired to see. After he was killed, it led me to his body so I could say goodbye before the scavengers found him. His voice was steady, but there was something underneath it that was not steady at all. Something that carried weight and loss and the particular exhaustion of someone who had been responsible for too many lives in the circumstances where no choice was good. At first, I thought it was coincidence, he said. Then I thought it was an omen of the kind my grandmother used to warn about. Then I began reading the Shadow Archives, and I found references to the Stonehaven Keepers, and I understood what the raven was doing. It was telling me to come home. It was telling me to find its person. The silence that followed was the kind that has weight and temperature. Senna felt it against her skin, felt it pressing gently at the inside of her chest, where a great many things had been compressed very small for years and were now cautiously beginning to expand. My father, she said. He was investigating this. The Keeper bloodline. Yes. And someone in this pack killed him because of it. Corvain's expression went very still, very careful. Yes, he said quietly. I believe so. Senna walked to the narrow window, looked out at the night and the forest beyond and the mountains rising dark against darker sky. The raven was out there somewhere. She could feel it the way she had always been able to feel it, a warm, constant presence at the edge of her awareness that she had never questioned because it had simply always been there. What happened to my mother? She asked without turning around. Behind her, Corvain was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, What do you know about your mother? Nothing, Senna said. No one ever spoke of her. I know she died when I was born. There are no records I could access. No grave marker I was ever shown. Nothing. There would not be, Corvain said, because her death was also not natural, and the people responsible had reason to make sure it was forgotten. Senna turned around. Corvain was still sitting at the table, but his expression had changed, had gone to someplace distant and sad. Tomorrow night, he said, come back here tomorrow night. There is someone who needs to speak with you, Someone who was there when your mother died. Someone who has been waiting a very long time to tell you the truth. Who? Senna asked. Elder Moira, he said. She was the midwife who delivered you, and she has carried the weight of what she witnessed for 22 years. Senna did not sleep that night. She sat in her small room with the raven on the windowsill and the cold coming through gaps in the old wood and worked through everything Corvain had told her with the methodical attention she brought to difficult things. She was a keeper. Whatever that meant. Whatever that was. Her mother had been a keeper, had died because of it, somehow. Her father had been investigating the truth. Had died because of it, certainly. The raven was not a bird. Or not only a bird, it was something else. Something old and purposeful and bound to her in ways she had not understood but had always felt. And tomorrow night she would learn about her mother. The raven shifted on its perch. Senna looked at it. It looked back with amber eyes that held the light from her single candle and reflected it back like small suns. Did you know her? Senna asked. My mother. Were you with her too? The raven did not answer. Ravens did not speak. But it tilted its head in that particular way that Senna had learned over 15 years meant acknowledgement. Meant yes. Meant I was there, I remember. I have always remembered. Senna stood, walked to the window, reached out slowly and, for the first time in all the years the raven had followed her, touched it deliberately with intention. Just her fingertips against black feathers that were softer than they looked and warm with a warmth that did not come from any ordinary bird. The moment her skin made contact, the world went white. Not painfully, not violently, just a sudden, complete erasure of the room around her, replaced by something else. Somewhere else. A memory that was not hers but was being offered to her anyway, pulled from the raven's consciousness, or the raven's purpose, or whatever it was that ravens who were more than ravens carried inside them. She saw a woman, young, maybe her own age, with dark hair and a face that Senna recognized because she had seen it in mirrors her entire life. The woman was smiling, one hand resting on a swollen belly, standing in this same small room that was brighter than, cleaner, full of afternoon light and the kind of quiet happiness that came from loving someone and being loved in return. The vision shifted. The same woman, older now by minutes or hours, lying on a narrow bed with sweat on her forehead and pain in her eyes, and Elder Moira beside her holding her hand and saying something Senna could not hear over the sound of a storm outside that was too loud, too violent, too wrong for natural weather. Another shift. The woman screaming now, not in pain of childbirth but in fear, her eyes fixed on something in the corner of the room that Senna could not see but could feel, a presence that was cold and deliberate and wrong. And then a final image. The woman still, too still, eyes open but not seeing anything, while Moira held a crying newborn and the raven sat on the windowsill watching everything with those amber eyes, bearing witness to something that should never have happened. The vision released her. Senna stumbled backward, her hand leaving the raven's feathers, the small room snapping back into focus around her. She was breathing hard. Her cheeks were wet. The raven watched her with an expression that might have been sorrow if ravens could feel sorrow, or might have been something else entirely that had no good translation into human emotion. She died, Senna whispered. My mother died, and you were there. You saw it happen. The raven clicked its beak once, soft and certain. Yes. Senna sank down onto her bed. She was shaking. Not from cold, but from the weight of understanding that was settling into her bones with each breath. Her mother had not died from natural complications of childbirth. Something had been in that room. Something deliberate. Something that had taken her life while Elder Moira watched helpless and the raven witnessed, and Senna herself came screaming into a world that had just lost the one person who would have protected her above all else. Tomorrow, Senna said to the raven, to herself, to the small cold room and the night beyond it. Tomorrow I will hear the rest of it. Tomorrow I will know who did this. The raven settled its wings, turned its gaze to the window, to the dark outline of Stonehaven Keep against darker sky, to the places where secrets lived and waited to be uncovered. Tomorrow, Senna thought. Tomorrow everything changes. But she was wrong about that. Everything had already changed. She just had not caught up to it yet. The second night, Elder Moira was already waiting in the reading room when Senna arrived. She was older than Senna remembered, though that made little sense because Senna had seen her countless times over the years, passing through corridors, or sitting in council meetings, or presiding over pack rituals, with the quiet authority of someone who had earned their position through decades of service rather than political maneuvering. But tonight, in the lamplight, Moira looked ancient, not frail but weathered, like stone that had stood against wind and rain for so long, It had been shaped by the erosion into something both harder and more fragile than it had been at the beginning. Corvain stood near the window, positioned like he was giving them space but ready to step in if needed. The protective instinct of an alpha, Senna thought. Or maybe just the protective instinct of someone who understood that what was about to happen would hurt. Moira gestured to the chair across from her. "Sit, child," she said. Her voice was rough with age and something else. Guilt, maybe, or grief that had been carried so long it had worn grooves into her vocal cords. Senna sat. The raven landed on the back of her chair without warning, a familiar weight and presence that steadied her in the same way it had steadied her every day since she was young. Moira looked at the raven for a long moment. Then she smiled, and it was the saddest smile Senna had ever seen. "It remembers me," Moira said softly. "After all these years, it remembers." "It was there," Senna said. "When my mother died, I saw it. The raven showed me." Moira's eyes filled with tears. She did not wipe them away. She let them fall, tracking down weathered cheeks in the lamplight. And Senna understood that these were tears that had been waiting 22 years to be shed in front of someone who had the right to witness them. "Yes," Moira said. "It was there, and so was I. And I have lived with what I saw every day since. And I have kept silent because I was a coward, and I thought silence would keep me safe." She took a breath that shook slightly. "Your mother's name was Alara," Moira said. "Alara Ashwood, though she was Alara Frost before she mated with your father. She was the most gifted keeper I ever knew. More gifted than her mother, more gifted than her grandmother. The bloodline ran strong in her, and she knew what she was from the time she was a child because back then, there were still people alive who remembered the old ways, who could teach her." Moira's gaze went distant, looking at something 22 years in the past. "She was beautiful," Moira said. "Not in the way Isolde Raven is beautiful, all calculated presentation and strategic charm. Ilara was beautiful the way a sunrise is beautiful, natural, inevitable, impossible to look away from." Senna felt something crack open in her chest, a hunger she had not known she carried. The hunger to know her mother not as an absence or a tragedy, but as a person. As someone who had lived and laughed and been beautiful in ways that had nothing to do with the manner of her death. "She loved your father," Moira continued. "That was not strategic either. Not a political match, not an arrangement made for territory or alliances. She loved him because he was kind and steady, and because when she told him what she was, what she carried, he did not flinch. He asked questions. He wanted to understand, and that was rare enough to be precious." The lamplight flickered. Outside the window, the wind had picked up, carrying the scent of coming snow. "When she became pregnant with you," Moira said, "she was careful, so careful. She knew the dangers, knew that carrying a child while carrying keeper abilities was delicate, that the bloodline sometimes passed with a violence that could overwhelm a body not prepared for it. She did everything right. Herbs to strengthen her, meditations to keep the power balanced. I was with her through all of it. I promised her I would keep you both safe." Moira's voice broke on the last word. "I failed," she whispered. "I failed her, and I failed you, and I have carried that failure like a stone around my neck for 22 years. Corvain moved from the window. He did not come close, but he was present, a solid reminder that Senna was not alone in this room with grief and guilt and truths that had been buried too long. "What happened?" Senna asked. Her voice was steady even though nothing inside her felt steady. "The vision the raven showed me. There was something in the room, something wrong. The medicine I gave her," Moira said, "for the pain of labor. It came from the council stores. It was supposed to be a simple tincture, something I had used for dozens of births before, but it had been tampered with. Someone had added something else to it, something that thinned the blood too much, that made bleeding impossible to stop." She looked at Senna with eyes that held decades of sorrow. "By the time I realized what was happening, it was too late. She was bleeding and the baby was coming, and there was nothing I could do except choose. Save her and lose you, or save you and lose her." "She chose," Senna said. Not a question, a certainty that settled in her bones like truth often did, arriving fully formed without need for explanation. "She chose you," Moira confirmed. "With her last breath, she chose you. Made me promise to protect you, to keep you hidden until you were old enough and strong enough to carry what she had carried." Tears were running down Senna's face now. She had not noticed when they started. The raven pressed against the back of her head, warm and solid and present in the way it had been present every day of her life. And she understood now that it had been keeping her mother's last wish. had been protecting her in the only way a raven bound to keep her bloodline could protect. Who? Senna asked. Who tampered with the medicine? Moira closed her eyes. When she opened them again, they were the eyes of someone who had finally decided that the cost of silence was higher than the cost of truth. Council Head Corwin, she said. The name landed in the quiet room like a stone thrown through glass. Sharp, shattering, final. I did not have proof then, Moira said. I suspected. The seal on the medicine bottle was his. But suspicion is not proof, and accusing a council head of murdering a keeper during childbirth was not something a midwife could do and expect to survive. So I kept silent. I let them bury Alara. I let them write it down as natural complications. I let your father grieve without knowing the full truth. Did my father know? Senna asked. Did he know what Corwin had done? Not at first, Corvain said from his position near the window. His voice was quiet, but it carried weight. But he figured it out eventually. That is why he died, Senna. Your father spent years investigating quietly, carefully. And 7 years ago, he found the evidence. An old medicine bottle stored in a place where Corwin thought no one would look, with Corwin's seal still visible on the wax. He paused. Your father was bringing that evidence to the council the night he died in the forest. Corwin had people watching, had people waiting. Your father never made it out of Thormere Forest alive. The room was silent except for the wind and the sound of Senna's own breathing and the quiet clicking of the raven's beak, a sound that meant anger or grief or something that had no good translation but was felt nonetheless. Why, Senna asked. Why would Corwin kill my mother? Why would he kill my father? Because 30 years ago, Moira said, Corwin's wife was a keeper too. And the council at that time, led by Corvain's grandfather, forced her to perform a territorial bonding ritual before she was ready, before she had an alpha mate to stabilize the power. The ritual killed her, burned her out from the inside, and Corwin watched it happen and could do nothing to stop it. She leaned forward. He loved her, Moira said. Loved her so completely that her death broke something fundamental in him. He decided that night that he would never let another keeper die that way, that he would erase the tradition entirely. Make it impossible for the council to demand that kind of sacrifice again. By killing them first, Senna said. The bitter logic of it was clear. Horrifying but clear. By killing them first, Moira confirmed, before they could be forced into service, before they could be used and discarded. He thought he was saving them, saving you. In his mind, a quick death in childbirth was mercy compared to what the ritual would do. Senna's hands gripped the edge of the table. She could not sit anymore, could not remain passive while her entire history rearranged itself around her like pieces of a puzzle finally falling into their correct places. Where is it? She asked. The evidence my father found. The bottle with Corwin's seal. Corvain and Moira exchanged a glance. We found it, Corvain said, yesterday, hidden in the keep archives. Exactly where Moira said your father told her it would be, in a message he sent the day before he died. He pulled something from his cloak. A small glass bottle, old and dusty, with wax seal still clinging to the cork. The seal bore Corwin's mark, unmistakable and damning. Senna took it, held it in her hands. This small object that her father had died trying to bring to light. This proof that her mother had been murdered. That her family had been destroyed not by accident or fate, but by deliberate choice made by a man who thought he was being merciful. Tomorrow, Corvain said quietly, I am calling a council meeting. I am presenting this evidence. I am charging Corwin formally with the deaths of your mother and father. No, Senna said. Both Corvain and Moira looked at her in surprise. Not yet, Senna said. Senna, hi. She was thinking fast now, pieces falling into place with the clarity that sometimes came when grief transformed into purpose. If you charge him tomorrow, he will have time to prepare a defense, time to manipulate the narrative, time to make this about politics instead of truth. She looked at Corvain. The choosing ceremony is in 12 days, she said. You said that keeper abilities are connected to alpha authority, that in the old traditions, the alpha needed the keeper's consent for legitimacy. Yes, Corvain said slowly, watching her with those gray eyes that missed nothing. Then we wait, Senna said. We let him think we do not know. We let him think he is still safe. And at the choosing ceremony in front of the entire pack, we reveal everything. Not just the evidence, the whole truth, what keepers are, what was done to my mother and father, what Corwin has been hiding for 30 years. She held up the bottle. We make it impossible for him to hide, she said. We make it impossible for the pack to look away. Moira was nodding slowly. The girl has her mother's strategic mind, she said. And her father's patience, Corvain added. There was something in his voice that had not been there before. Respect, maybe, or recognition, or both. There is one problem, Moira said. If we wait, if we let Corwin continue believing his secrets are safe, we also give him time to act if he suspects anything. He has already killed twice to protect what he has hidden. He will kill again if he feels threatened. Then we make sure he does not feel threatened, Senna said. I go back to being invisible, back to sweeping corridors and carrying linens and keeping my eyes down. He has ignored me for 22 years. He will ignore me for 12 more days. And me? Corvain asked. I am not particularly skilled at being invisible. Senna looked at him. At this Alpha King who had spent 3 years at war looking for answers that would help a servant girl he had never met, who had lost his brother searching for truth about keepers and territorial bonds and old traditions that most of the pack had forgotten, who stood in this reading room offering her not just information, but alliance, partnership, the thing her father had wanted to give her mother and had been murdered for attempting. You continue as you have been, Senna said. Play politics, attend council meetings. Let Corwin think you are considering Isolde Raven for queen, because that is what everyone expects. Let him think the war changed nothing except making you tired. And between now and the ceremony? Corvain asked. Between now and the ceremony, Senna said, we prepare. You teach me what you learned about keepers, about what I am supposed to be able to do, and I learn to access it, so that when the time comes, when we stand in front of the pack and reveal the truth, I can prove it. Not just with words or old bottles or testimony, but with the power itself. The raven spread its wings on the back of her chair, not flying, just extending them fully, a gesture of agreement or approval or readiness. Senna felt it in her chest like an echo. Like her body responding to something, the raven understood that she was only beginning to grasp. 12 days, Corvain said. Can you awaken keeper abilities in 12 days? I do not know, Senna said honestly, but I am going to try. The next 7 days were the strangest of Senna's life. By day, she returned to invisibility. She swept corridors and folded linens and stood in corners of rooms where important people discussed important matters. She kept her eyes down and her voice soft and her entire self compressed into the small, unremarkable shape she had perfected over years. By night, she met Corvain in the reading room and learned what it meant to be a keeper. The first night, he brought books, ancient texts recovered from the Shadow Archives, written in languages that took concentration to parse but were not entirely foreign. Records of territorial bonds and the wolves who maintained them. Descriptions of abilities that sounded impossible until Senna read them 3 times and realized they were describing things she had felt all her life without having words for them. The ability to sense disturbances in pack bonds, to feel when the territory itself was strained or threatened, to communicate not through words but through the deep underground connections that linked all wolves to the land they claimed. Your mother could do all of this, Corvain said, sitting across from her with lamplight, making his face look younger and more uncertain than it did in daylight. According to the records Moira kept, Alara could walk through Stonehaven and know immediately if someone was sick or injured or grieving, could find lost children by feeling for their connection to their parents, could sense threats to the territory days before they arrived. How? Senna asked. The same way you know where the raven is right now without looking, Corvain said. Senna went very still. He was right. The raven was outside the window, perched on the stone ledge, watching the night. She had not looked, had not heard it land, but she knew it was there with the same certainty she knew her own heartbeat. That connection, Corvain said quietly, that awareness of something beyond yourself that is also part of yourself, that is what keeper ability feels like. You already have it with the raven. You just need to learn to extend it to the territory, to the pack, to the bonds that hold everything together. The second night, they went into the forest, not far, just to the edge, where thornmire trees grew thick and dark and the air smelled of pine and snow and something older that had no name. The raven led them, flying ahead with purpose, guiding them to a clearing Senna had never seen before, though she had walked these woods as a child. In the center of the clearing was a stone. Not large, not particularly remarkable, just a flat gray stone, half buried in moss and fallen pine needles. But when Senna stepped close to it, she felt something in her chest respond. A resonance, like a tuning fork struck in one room creating sympathetic vibration in another. Your mother came here, Corvain said. Moira told me about it. This was one of her sacred places, where she practiced. Senna knelt beside the stone, placed her palms flat against its cold surface, and the world shifted. Not violently, not with the disorienting suddenness of the vision the raven had shown her. This was gentler. A slow opening, like a door that had been locked for 22 years, finally being pushed open from the inside. She felt the forest, not as a collection of individual trees and animals and earth, but as a whole, as an organism, living and breathing and aware in ways that had nothing to do with consciousness as humans understood it. The roots underground, forming networks of communication. The wolves running through distant parts of territory, carrying pack bonds like threads connecting them to center. The birds and deer and smaller creatures all woven into the larger pattern. And threaded through all of it, barely visible but definitely present, was something else. Something that felt like her mother. Not a ghost, not a memory, but an impression left in the land itself. The mark of someone who had loved this place and been loved by it in return. Tears ran down Senna's face. She did not wipe them away. She let them fall onto the stone, salt and water mixing with moss and ancient rock, and she felt the territory receive them, accept them, recognize her as Alara's daughter. "I feel it," she whispered. "I feel everything." "Good," Corvain said. He was kneeling beside her now, one hand resting on her shoulder, grounding her in the present while she navigated the overwhelming vastness of what her abilities could sense. That is the first step, awareness. The next step is learning to act, to influence, to heal when things are broken. But that would take more than 7 nights. The third night, Senna tried to touch the pack bonds directly. Tried to feel not just the territory but the individual threads connecting each wolf to the larger whole. It was harder than sensing the forest. Pack bonds were intimate things, protected by instinct and privacy and the natural boundaries that kept individuals separate even while linking them together. She found Corvain first, which made sense because he was sitting 3 feet away from her and his presence as Alpha was too large to miss. His bond felt like steel wrapped in something softer. Duty and grief and responsibility carried with the kind of strength that came from having no choice but to be strong. She found Moira next. The old woman's bond was fraying at the edges, worn thin by age and guilt and the weight of secrets carried too long. But at its center it was still solid, still committed to the pack despite everything. She found others. Warriors she did not know by name but recognized by the particular flavor of their bonds, sharp and ready and always slightly on edge. Servants whose bonds felt tired and resigned and occasionally bitter. Children whose bonds were bright and uncomplicated and trusting in ways that made Senna's heart ache. And she found Isolde. The council head's daughter should have been easy to find. She was important, visible, constantly surrounded by people seeking her attention and favor. But her bond was harder to locate than it should have been. Not because it was weak, but because it was deliberately obscured. Hidden behind layers of performance and strategic presentation until the real Isolde, the actual core of who she was beneath all the political maneuvering, was barely visible even to keeper senses. Senna touched that hidden core carefully, not invasively, just a gentle brush of awareness, the same way you might touch someone's shoulder to let them know you were there. And Isolde's bond recoiled, not in anger, in surprise. And underneath the surprise, something that felt very much like loneliness. Senna opened her eyes. Corvain was watching her with an expression she could not quite read. "What did you find?" he asked. "Everyone," Senna said. "I felt everyone. The whole pack, all the bonds, all the connections." "And what did they feel like?" Senna thought about it, about how to put into words something that existed beyond language. "Like a tapestry," she said finally. "Individual threads that only make sense when you see the whole pattern. Some threads are strong, some are fraying, some are tangled, but they are all part of the same piece of cloth." Corvain nodded slowly. "That is what an alpha feels," he said. "Every day, all the time. The weight of all those threads, all those connections. The responsibility of keeping the pattern intact." He paused. "It is why we need keepers," he said quietly. "Because alphas can feel the bonds, but we cannot heal them. We can command and protect and organize, but we cannot fix what is broken at the fundamental level. That is what keepers do. That is what your mother did, and that is what you will do, if you choose to." "If I choose?" Senna asked. "Always if you choose," Corvain said. "Your mother did not get that choice. The old council took it from her. I will not take it from you. Whatever you decide about your abilities, about the ceremony, about any of this, it is your decision. Not mine, not the pack's, yours." The weight of that statement settled over Senna like a blanket, heavy but not unwelcome. For the first time in her life, someone with power was offering her agency, was telling her that she mattered not because of what she could do for them, but because she existed and had the right to choose her own path. She did not know what to do with that gift except hold it carefully and try not to break it. The fourth night, something shifted between them. They were not in the reading room. They were in the stables because Corvain had decided that part of Senna's education should include learning to ride properly. Keepers in the old traditions traveled throughout territory, he said. You cannot do that on foot. Senna had ridden before, but only the steady, gentle horses used for farm work. Never a wolf-pack warhorse. Never anything like the massive black mare Corvain led out of her stall with the easy confidence of someone who had spent years in the saddle. This is Nightshade, Corvain said. She belonged to my brother. She has not let anyone ride her since he died. The mare tossed her head, dark eyes rolling slightly. Senna should have been afraid, should have stepped back and suggested a smaller, calmer horse. But the raven landed on Nightshade's back without hesitation, and the horse went still. The raven trusts her, Senna said. The raven trusts very few things, Corvain said. But yes, it trusts her. He helped Senna mount. His hands on her waist were steady and impersonal, but she felt the warmth of them through her clothes, felt the strength in them, and something in her responded that had nothing to do with keeper abilities or pack bonds or anything except the simple human reaction to being touched gently by someone who could have been rough and chose not to be. They rode out into the pre-dawn darkness, not into the forest this time, but along the ridge that overlooked Stonehaven territory. The land stretched out below them in shades of gray and silver, and Senna felt it all. Every tree, every stream, every wolf sleeping in dens or keeping watch on borders, the whole vast connected web of life and land and loyalty. This, Corvain said, riding beside her with the easy grace of someone born to it. This is what we protect. Not just the keep or the council or the politics. This, the land itself, the bonds that hold it together. Senna looked at him. He was not looking at her. He was looking at the territory with an expression of such deep weariness and such profound love that she felt something in her chest crack open. You are tired, she said. It was not a question. I have been tired for 3 years, Corvain said. Longer. Since my father died and I took the alpha position before I was ready. Since the council started demanding things I did not know how to give. Since the war started and I watched good wolves die for reasons I am still not sure were worth their lives. He finally looked at her. Since my brother died in my arms asking me to make it mean something, he said quietly, and I did not know how to promise him it would. They had stopped riding. The horses stood still on the ridge while the sky began to lighten in the east, gray giving way to the pale blue that preceded sunrise. What was his name? Senna asked. Theron, Corvain said. He was younger than me by 5 years, braver than I ever was. He volunteered for the Shadow Campaign because he believed in finding answers. In uncovering truth, he died believing we would succeed. You did succeed, Senna said. You found what you were looking for. You brought back the knowledge about keepers, about my mother, about what the pack has lost. But he is still dead, Corvain said. There was no self-pity in it, just fact. Just the weight of loss that no amount of success or recovered knowledge could balance. Senna reached across the space between horses, took his hand. He looked down at their joined hands with surprise, and she held on tighter. He is dead. She said, and my mother is dead, and my father is dead, and we cannot bring any of them back. But we can make what we do next matter. We can make it mean something. Corvain's fingers tightened around hers. They sat there on the ridge, holding hands between horses while the sun rose and painted the territory in gold. And Senna felt through keeper senses and through simple human awareness that something had changed, that they were no longer just an alpha and a servant working toward the same goal. They were something else, something that did not have a name yet, but was being built moment by moment, choice by choice, touch by touch. The fifth night, Isolde came to find her. Not in the reading room, in the servants' quarters, which was shocking enough that Senna nearly dropped the linen she was folding when Isolde appeared in the doorway like some kind of silk-clad ghost, manifesting in a space she had no business occupying. The other servants scattered immediately. Nobody wanted to be present when the council head's daughter spoke to someone in private, because private conversations with Isolde Raven usually ended with someone being subtly destroyed. But Isolde did not look like she had come to destroy anyone. She looked, Senna thought, with surprise, nervous. Walk with me, Isolde said. Not a command, a request. Senna set down the linens, followed Isolde out of the quarters and through corridors, and eventually to the kitchen garden, where Senna had first spoken with Corvain, what felt like years ago, but had only been a week. The garden was empty, cold. The herbs had been harvested for winter, and the beds lay bare under frost. Isolde stood in the center of the garden and turned to face Senna, and in the moonlight she looked younger than she did in daylight light, less calculated, more uncertain. "I owe you an apology," Isolde said. Senna waited. She had learned patience from years of being invisible. She could wait for Isolde to find whatever words were trying to work their way to the surface. "I have been cruel to you," Isolde said. "Not in obvious ways, not in ways anyone would call me to account for, but in small, deliberate ways, in not seeing you when I could have, in making sure you knew you were beneath notice, in stepping over your spilled linens without caring that you would have to clean them up alone." She took a breath. "I did it because I envied you," she said. That was surprising enough that Senna's careful patience broke. "You envied me?" "Yes," Isolde said simply, "because you got to be invisible. Because nobody expected anything from you except competence at tasks that did not matter. Because you could be yourself, whoever that was, and nobody cared enough to try to shape you into something else." She laughed, but it was not a happy sound. "I have been shaped my entire life," Isolde said. "By my father, by the council, by every person who looked at me and saw a useful tool for their ambitions. I have been taught how to walk and talk and smile and flirt and manipulate and perform, and I am very good at all of it. I am brilliant at being exactly what a room requires." She met Senna's eyes. "But I do not know who I am when I am alone," Isolde said quietly. "I do not know what I want or what I think or what would make me happy. I only know what I am supposed to want, what I am supposed to be." Senna felt Keeper's senses stir, felt Isolde's bond, still hidden under layers of performance, but visible now that she knew to look for it. And at its core, underneath everything, was loneliness so profound it made Senna's chest ache. "Why are you telling me this?" Senna asked gently. "Because I felt you," Isolde said. "3 nights ago, I felt you touch my bond, and nobody has ever done that before. Nobody has ever looked past the performance to see what is actually there. And it terrified me, and it also made me realize that I am so tired of pretending." She stepped closer. "I know Corvain is going to choose you," she said. "I know the choosing ceremony is a formality. I knew it the moment I saw the way he looked at you in the upper gallery. And I could be angry about that. I could make your life difficult. I could use every political tool my father has taught me to undermine you." She paused. "But I do not want to," she said. "I want to help you. Because maybe if I help you become what you are meant to be, I can figure out what I am meant to be. Something other than Council Head Corwin's daughter. Something real." The garden was very quiet. Frost sparkled on bare earth. The moon hung low and full. "You felt me touch your bond," Senna said. "You know what that means. You know what I am." "I know you are a keeper," Isolde said. "I found books in my father's study, old books he thought were hidden, books about the traditions he has been trying to erase. I know what your mother was. I know what you can become." She took a breath. "And I know my father killed them," she said. "Your mother and your father both. I found evidence. Letters he thought he had destroyed. I know what he did, and I know why he did it, and I have been carrying that knowledge for 2 days trying to decide what to do with it." Senna went very still. "What did you decide?" "That I am not my father," Isolde said firmly. "That what he did was wrong, even if he thought it was mercy. That the traditions matter, and the truth matters, and you deserve justice." She reached into her cloak and pulled out a folded paper, handed it to Senna. "This is a letter my father wrote to the physician who prepared the medicine that killed your mother," Isolde said. "Specific instructions for what to add to the tincture, written in his own hand, dated 3 days before your birth." Senna took the letter, unfolded it with shaking hands, read her own death sentence written out in careful script, instructions for murder disguised as medical care. "Why?" Senna asked. "Why are you giving this to me?" "Because you were brave enough to touch my bond," Isolde said, "to see me, and I want to be brave enough to stand with you when you stand against my father, even if it costs me everything." The raven landed on the garden wall, watched both of them with amber eyes that held something that might have been approval. Senna looked at Isolde, at this woman who had spent her whole life performing, who was choosing truth anyway, who was offering alliance when she could have chosen preservation. "Thank you," Senna said, and she meant it with her whole heart. They stood together in the garden, two women who had been shaped by the same man's crimes in different ways, and began to plan how they would bring those crimes into the light. The final nights before the ceremony, Senna barely slept. Her keeper abilities were awakening faster now. She could feel the pack bonds all the time, not just when she concentrated, could sense disturbances and fractures, could feel the way certain wolves' connections were strained or damaged. She could feel Corwin. His bond was a complicated thing, strong at its foundation because he had been council head for decades and had earned his position through genuine service, but twisted, warped by grief that had never healed, by love that had transformed into something destructive, by the weight of murders committed in the name of mercy. She could feel him watching her now that her abilities were active, could sense his attention like a cold weight whenever she passed through rooms he occupied. He knew something had changed, knew she was no longer quite as invisible as she had been, but he did not know what she knew, did not know about the evidence or the alliances or the plan. Not yet. On the 11th night, Senna found something in her mother's journal that changed everything. She had been reading it every night, these records Moira had kept of Alar's life and work as a keeper. Tonight she reached the final entries, written in the weeks before Senna's birth. And there in her mother's careful handwriting was a description of the territorial bonding ritual, the one that had killed Corwin's wife, the one Corwin had been trying to prevent by erasing keepers entirely. The ritual was dangerous if performed alone. That part was true. A keeper channeling that much power without support could burn out, could be consumed by the very forces they were trying to direct. But performed with an alpha mate, with the bond between them stabilizing the flow of power, the ritual was not only safe, it was transformative. It created a connection between keeper and alpha, and territory that made all three stronger, that healed old wounds in the pack bonds, that brought stability and protection that could last generations. Corwin's wife had died because she had been forced to perform the ritual alone, before she had an alpha mate, before the bond that would have saved her existed. If she had been allowed to wait to bond first, she would have lived. Senna read the passage 3 times. Then she showed it to Corvain. They were in the reading room. They had been meeting here every night, sometimes to work on keeper training, sometimes just to sit in comfortable silence reading separate books. The space had become theirs in a way Senna had never had anything be hers before. Corvain read the journal entry. His expression went very still. He did not know, Corvain said quietly. Corwin did not know this. He thought the ritual itself was deadly, thought keepers were doomed to die young, so he killed them to spare them that fate. But he was wrong, Senna said, and my mother knew it, and my father was going to prove it. That is what Corwin could not allow, not the existence of keepers, but the revelation that he had been murdering them unnecessarily. She looked at Corvain across the lamplight. At the ceremony, she said, when we reveal everything, we have to tell the pack this too. Not just what Corwin did, but why the old ways matter. Why keepers and alphas together are stronger than either alone. Corvain stood, walked around the table, stood in front of her, close enough that she had to look up to see his face. The mate bond, he said quietly, between keeper and alpha. It is not just political. It is the foundation of the ritual, the thing that makes it safe. Yes, Senna said. So when I choose you at the ceremony, Corvain said, when we bond, it will not just be symbolic. It will be real. It will activate the full depth of your abilities. And mine. Yes, Senna said again. He reached out slowly, giving her time to move away if she wanted. She did not move away. His hand cupped her face, thumb brushing her cheekbone, and she leaned into the touch with a hunger she had not known she carried. I am not choosing you just for politics, Corvain said. I need you to know that. I am choosing you because I have been looking for you my entire life without knowing it. Because the Raven knew before I did. Because you are brave and brilliant, and you make me believe that the future can be better than the past. Senna's eyes filled with tears. I am still a servant, she said. I am still the invisible girl who sweeps corridors. You have never been invisible to me, Corvain said. Not from the moment I saw you in that gallery with the Raven on your shoulder. Not for 1 second since. He leaned down, she leaned up, and they kissed in the lamplight of the old reading room, and Senna felt the mate bond begin to form between them. Not complete yet, not sealed, but present, real, inevitable. When they pulled apart, the Raven was watching them from the windowsill. Its eyes held ancient approval. 2 days until the ceremony. 2 days until everything changed. Senna was ready. The night before the choosing ceremony, Senna could not sleep. She sat by the window in her small room, watching snow fall in the darkness, fat flakes drifting down with the lazy inevitability of things that cannot be rushed or stopped. The raven was inside with her tonight, perched on the foot of her narrow bed, watching her with eyes that reflected the single candle burning on her table. Tomorrow, everything would change. Tomorrow, she would stand in front of the entire pack and claim a space in the world that had been denied her since the day she was born. Tomorrow, she would stop being invisible. The thought terrified her more than she wanted to admit. She had spent years perfecting invisibility, had built her entire survival strategy around being small and unremarkable and easy to overlook. And now she was going to step into the center of the standing stone circle and let hundreds of wolves see her. Really see her. Not as a servant, not as an unfortunate reminder of tragedy, but as a keeper, as someone who mattered, as someone worthy of being chosen by an Alpha King. Her hands were shaking. She pressed them flat against the cold windowsill and made herself breathe slowly, evenly, the way she had taught herself to breathe through difficult things. The raven made a soft sound, not quite a caw, something gentler, a sound it only made for her, when they were alone, when it wanted her attention without demanding it. "I know," Senna said quietly. "I know I can do this. I know I am ready." But knowing and believing were different things. There was a knock at her door. Senna froze. It was past midnight. No one should be at her door. No one except servants even knew where her room was, tucked away at the back of the quarters where visiting nobles would never have reason to venture. She opened the door slowly. Council head Corwin stood in the narrow hallway. He looked older than she had ever seen him. The torchlight from the corridor carved deep shadows under his eyes and made the lines around his mouth look like canyons. He was not wearing his formal council robes, just simple clothes, dark and unremarkable, like he had wanted to move through the keep without being noticed. Like he had learned something about invisibility too. "May I come in?" he asked. His voice was rough, tired, the voice of someone who had been carrying weight for too long and was finally ready to set it down. Every instinct Senna had screamed at her to slam the door, to refuse him entry, to keep the space between them absolute and uncrossable, because this man had killed her mother and killed her father and had spent 22 years letting her believe she was nothing. But her keeper senses, newly awakened and constantly active now, felt his bond, felt the fractures in it, felt the grief that had poisoned him from the inside for 3 decades. And she stepped aside. Corwin entered her small room, looked around at the sparse furnishings, the single candle, the window with frost gathering at its edges. The raven watched him from the bed with eyes that held no forgiveness, but also no fear. "I know why you have come," Senna said. She kept her voice steady even though her heart was racing. "You know what tomorrow will bring. You know what will be revealed." "Yes," Corwin said simply. "Isolde told me everything. What she gave you, what she knows, what she has chosen." He moved to the window, stood looking out at the falling snow with his back to her, and Senna saw on the set of his shoulders the posture of someone who had already surrendered. "I did not come to threaten you," he said, "or to beg you to stay silent. I came because you deserve to hear the truth from me, not filtered through evidence or testimony or Corvain's careful presentation to the council." He turned to face her. "I killed your mother," he said. The words were flat, factual, without defense or excuse. "I tampered with the medicine Moira gave her during your birth. I knew it would cause hemorrhaging. I knew she would not survive it. I did it deliberately and with full knowledge of what I was doing." Senna's throat was tight. She had known this already, had seen the evidence, had carried the knowledge for days now. But hearing him say it, hearing him own it without hesitation, hit differently than she expected. "Why?" she asked. Not because she did not know, but because she needed to hear him say it. "Because 30 years ago," Corwin said, "I watched my wife burn alive from the inside during a keeper ritual. She was 23 years old. We had been mated for 2 years. She was everything to me. And the council, led by the old Alpha King, forced her to perform a territorial bonding before she was ready, before we understood what the ritual required. And she died in agony while I held her and could do nothing except watch." His voice cracked. "I swore that day that I would never let it happen again," he said, "that I would never watch another keeper suffer that fate. So when Alara became pregnant, when I knew she would give birth to a child who would carry the bloodline, I made a choice. I told myself it was mercy, that a quick death in childbirth was kinder than years of being used by the council and then discarded when the ritual destroyed her. He looked at Senna with eyes that held decades of pain. I was wrong, he said quietly. I have been wrong for 30 years. I killed your mother to save her from a fate she could have survived if I had let her live long enough to learn the truth. If I had trusted that she and your father would find the answers I could not find. And my father? Senna asked. When did you know you had to kill him too? 7 years ago, Mark Corwin said. When he found the medicine bottle I thought I had destroyed. When he came to me privately and asked if I knew what it meant, I saw in his eyes that he knew, that he had pieced it together, that he was going to bring it to the council. He paused. I could have let him, Corwin said. I could have confessed then, accepted judgment. But I was a coward. I was afraid of what would happen if the pack learned what I had done, afraid of losing everything I had built. So I sent men to intercept him in the forest, made it look like an accident. And I have lived with that decision every day since. The room was very quiet. The candle flame did not waver. The snow continued to fall outside the window. Why are you telling me this? Senna asked. Because tomorrow you will stand in front of the pack and reveal everything, Corwin said. You will present the evidence. You will tell them what I did, and they will demand justice, as they should. He stepped closer. But before that happens, I need you to understand something, he said. What I did was wrong, unforgivable, but it came from love. Twisted, broken love, but love nonetheless. I love my wife so much that her death destroyed me, and I loved her memory so much that I was willing to become a murderer to prevent other women from suffering as she suffered. His eyes were wet. I am not asking for forgiveness, he said. I do not deserve it. I am asking that when you tell the pack what I did, you also tell them why, because the why matters. Because if we do not understand how love can twist into something monstrous, we will make the same mistakes I made. Senna felt tears on her own face. She did not know when she had started crying. The raven was beside her now, warm weight against her leg, grounding her in the present moment. Tomorrow, Corwin said, when Corvain chooses you, when you accept the mate bond, you will perform the territorial bonding ritual, and you will survive it. Because you will do it the right way, with your mate stabilizing the power. And when the pack sees that, when they understand that keepers do not have to die young, that the tradition is not a death sentence, they will know what I took from them. He moved toward the door. I came here tonight to ask you one thing, he said. When you stand at those standing stones tomorrow, when you feel the power of what you are awakening in you, think of my wife. Think of Alara. Think of all the keepers who should have lived and did not because I was too broken to let them try. He opened the door. And then do better than I did, he said quietly. Choose love that heals instead of love that destroys. Choose truth even when it is hard. Choose to be seen even when invisibility feels safer. He left. The door closed softly behind him. And Senna stood in her small room with the raven pressed against her, and snow falling outside, and wept for the man who had killed her parents, and for the wife he had loved, and for the 30 years of compounding tragedy that could have been prevented if anyone had been brave enough to ask for help instead of trying to bear their grief alone. Dawn came cold and clear. The entire pack was in motion by the time the sun crested the eastern mountains. The choosing ceremony was the most important ritual in wolfpack culture, and this one carried additional weight. An alpha king returning from 3 years of war to finally take a mate, the stability the pack desperately needed, the future being decided in front of everyone. Senna was given a room in the main keep to prepare, not her servants' quarters. A real room with windows that looked out over the courtyard, and a bed large enough for 2 people, and furniture that was not secondhand or broken. Moira came to help her dress. The gown was simple. White wool, soft and warm against her skin, with embroidery at the collar and cuffs in patterns that Moira said were traditional for keepers. Symbols that had not been used in generations, but that Moira remembered from her own grandmother's time. Your mother wore something like this, Moira said, fastening the dress with careful hands. The day she bonded with your father. She was so beautiful, so happy. I thought that day that the future was going to be bright, that the old ways were coming back, that keepers would be honored again. She paused, fingers stilling on the fabric. And then she died, Moira said, and I thought the future had died with her. But I was wrong. The future was just waiting for you. Senna looked at herself in the mirror. She barely recognized the woman looking back. Not because of the dress, though it transformed her, but because of her own face, the way she was holding herself, shoulders back instead of hunched, head up instead of down, eyes meeting her own reflection instead of sliding away. She looked like someone who took up space in the world, someone who mattered, The raven landed on her shoulder. Its weight was familiar, grounding, exactly what she needed. "Are you ready?" Moira asked. "No," Senna said honestly, "but I am going anyway." The standing stones were older than Stonehaven Keep, older than any written record of the northern wolf packs. Great pillars of dark granite arranged in a circle large enough for 100 wolves to stand inside, carved with symbols that no one living could fully translate, but that everyone understood meant sacred, important, binding. The pack assembled there in the late morning, filling the space around the stones with bodies and breath and the particular electric anticipation that came before significant pack rituals. Hundreds of wolves from across the territory, dressed in their best clothes, speaking in low voices that created a constant murmur, like wind through distant trees. Senna arrived on foot, walking the path from the keep to the stones with Moira on one side and Isolde on the other. The sight of Council Head Corwin's daughter walking in support of a servant girl caused whispers, but Isolde ignored them with the same serene confidence she brought to everything. "Let them talk," Isolde said quietly. "After today, they will have much more interesting things to discuss than who I choose to walk with." The pack parted for them, not smoothly, not willingly. But they parted, creating a corridor through the crowd toward the stone circle, and Senna walked through it with the raven on her shoulder and her heart hammering against her ribs and her hands steady, because she had learned long ago to keep her hands steady even when everything inside her was shaking. Corvain was already there, standing at the north point of the circle with his head guard, Theron and the council elders arranged around him. He was wearing formal alpha regalia, dark gray and blackened with silver threading that caught the winter light. He looked like a king, like someone born to command and protect and lead. He looked at Senna like she was the only person in the world. The murmuring quieted as she entered the circle. Moira and Isolde stepped back, taking their places at the edge, leaving Senna standing alone in the center of the ancient stones with hundreds of eyes watching her, and the weight of everything she carried suddenly feeling very heavy. Elder Moira stepped forward. As the oldest member of the council, it was her right and duty to officiate. Her voice, when she spoke, carried to every corner of the gathered pack. "We are here," Moira said, "to witness the choosing, to see our Alpha King claim his mate, to bind the future of this pack in the old way, the true way, the way that has held us together since the first wolves claimed this territory." She gestured to Corvain. "Alpha King Corvain Thornfield," she said, "step forward and make your choice known." Corvain stepped into the circle. He moved with the controlled grace of someone who had spent years learning to carry power without letting it weigh him down. But Senna could feel through their partial bond, through the connection they had been building over the past 12 days, that he was nervous too, that this mattered to him in ways that went beyond politics or duty. He stopped in front of her, close enough that she could see the gray of his eyes, the faint scar on his jaw from some long-ago battle, the way he was breathing carefully like he was trying to keep himself steady. "I have been to war," Corvain said. His voice was quiet, but it carried. The stones themselves seemed to amplify it. "I have led wolves into battle. I have made decisions that cost lives and decisions that saved them. I have carried the weight of this pack on my shoulders for years that felt like decades." He paused. "And I have been searching," he said, "without knowing what I was searching for something that would make it all mean something, for someone who would see the weight I carry and help me carry it, for a partner who understood that strength is not about being unbreakable, but about choosing to keep going even when you are breaking." He extended his hand. "I choose Senna Ashwood," he said, "daughter of Beta Ashwood and Keeper Ilara. I choose her not because the council expects it, not because politics demands it. I choose her because she is brave and brilliant and kind. Because the Raven chose her first and I am wise enough to trust what the Raven knows. Because she makes me believe that the future can be better than the past." The pack was silent, completely silent, the kind of silence that has texture and weight. Senna looked at Corvain's extended hand, at the choice being offered to her, at the future spreading out before her if she took it, and she hesitated. Not because she did not want it, not because she did not care for Corvain or believe in what they could build together. She hesitated because something inside her needed to be said first. Something that had been compressed small for 22 years and needed space to breathe. She turned to face the assembled pack. All those wolves who had walked past her for years without seeing her, who had let her be invisible because invisible was easier than complicated. "Before I answer," Senna said, and her voice shook, but it held, "there are things you need to know. About me, about my family. about what has been hidden from this pack for 30 years. She felt Corvain's surprise through their bond. This was not part of the plan. They were supposed to complete the bonding first, then reveal the truth afterward. But Senna had realized during the long night of no sleep that she could not accept being chosen until the pack understood exactly who was being chosen. Could not step into visibility while still carrying invisible truths. My mother was Alara Ashwood, Senna said. She was a keeper. Do you know what that means? Most of you do not, because the knowledge was deliberately erased, but keepers are the ones who maintain the bonds between pack and territory, who keep the connections strong, who heal what is broken in the ties that hold us all together. She held up her hand. The raven spread its wings on her shoulder, and as it did, Senna let her keeper abilities rise to the surface. Let them become visible in a way they had not been before. The standing stones began to hum, a low resonance that every wolf present felt in their bones. The sound of very old agreements waking up. The sound of the territory itself recognizing that its keeper had returned. Gasps rippled through the crowd. My mother died giving birth to me, Senna said. But it was not natural complications. She was murdered. The medicine she was given during labor was poisoned. Poisoned by someone who thought he was being merciful. Who thought keepers were doomed to die young and wanted to spare her a painful fate. She looked directly at Corwin. The old council head stood at the edge of the circle, his face carved from stone, his eyes wet. Council head Corwin killed my mother, Senna said. And 7 years later, when my father discovered the truth, Corwin killed him too. These are not accusations. These are facts. We have evidence, letters, the medicine bottle itself, testimony. The pack erupted. Voices rising in shock and anger and disbelief. The elders shouting for order. Wolves turning to look at Corwin with expressions ranging from betrayal to fury. Senna raised her voice. Let it carry over the chaos with the same authority the stones gave Corvain. But before you demand his execution, she said, before you let rage dictate justice, you need to understand Wavam. The pack quieted, not because they wanted to listen, because the stones themselves seemed to demand it, the humming intensifying until it was impossible to speak over it. 30 years ago, Senna said, Corwin's wife was also a keeper. The council at that time forced her to perform a territorial bonding ritual before she was ready, before she had an alpha mate to stabilize the power. And the ritual killed her, burned her out from the inside while Corwin watched helpless. She let that sink in. He killed my mother because he loved his wife, Senna said. He killed my father because he was trying to protect a secret he thought would save lives. He was wrong, terribly, unforgivably wrong, but he was not evil. He was broken, and he has spent 30 years compounding that brokenness instead of asking for help healing it. She turned back to Corvain. This is what I need you to understand before I accept your choice, she said. I am not just the invisible servant girl you saw in the upper gallery. I am the daughter of murdered parents. I am a keeper who has spent 22 years not knowing what I was. I am someone who has learned that invisibility feels safe, but costs everything important. She took a breath. I am not accepting you because an Alpha King chose me and I have no right to refuse, she said. I am not accepting you because the pack expects it, or because it is politically convenient, or because I have nowhere else to go. She stepped forward, took his hand, felt the warmth of his fingers closing around hers. I am accepting you because I choose you, she said clearly. I choose you because you went to war searching for answers that would help someone you had never met. Because you lost your brother looking for truth. Because you see me, really see me. And you make me want to be seen. Her voice strengthened. But more than that, she said, I choose myself. I choose to stop being invisible. I choose to honor my mother and my father by living the life they died trying to give me. I choose to be a keeper, not because anyone demands it, but because it is what I am. I choose to heal this pack's wounds instead of letting them fester the way Corwin's wounds festered. She turned to address the pack one more time. I choose to stand here in front of all of you and claim space in this world, she said. Not because someone gave me permission, but because I was always supposed to be here. Because my mother was supposed to be here. Because Corwin's wife was supposed to be here. Because keepers matter, and I am done pretending I do not. The silence that followed her words was absolute. Then Corvain raised their joined hands above their heads. I accept your choice, he said. His voice was rough with emotion. Your choice of me and your choice of yourself. And I make my choice again, knowing everything you have told me. I choose Senna Ashwood, my mate, my keeper, my equal. The mate bond snapped into place. It was not gentle. It was not subtle. It was a rush of connection so intense Senna gasped, her free hand going to her chest where the bond settled like a second heartbeat. She felt Corvain in her mind, in her soul, in every cell of her body. Felt his strength and his grief and his hope. Felt the way he saw her, not as a servant or a keeper or any single thing, but as all of herself at once, complex and contradictory and perfectly whole. The raven spread its wings fully, and this time something different happened. Light poured from the bird, not harsh, not blinding, but steady and golden and warm, the color of afternoon sun through amber. The light spread from the raven to Senna, wrapping around her like a cloak, and from Senna to Corvain, connecting them in visible threads of power, and from both of them into the standing stones. The stones sang, there was no other word for it. They sang with voices that had been silent for generations, a harmony that resonated in every wolf's chest that made the very air vibrate with recognition and welcome, and the profound relief of something that had been wrong for a very long time finally being set right. Senna felt the territorial bonds all at once, not gradually, not one at a time, all of them. Every wolf in the pack, their connections to each other and to the land itself, spread out before her deeper senses like a vast tapestry made of light and intention. She saw the frayed bonds, the broken ones, the ones twisted by old grief or recent betrayal, the ones strained by illness or distance, or simply the weight of living in a pack that had forgotten how to maintain its own foundations. And she began to heal them, not dramatically, not with flash or spectacle, just small, careful adjustments. A thread retied here, a knot loosened there, the work her mother had done, the work her mother's mother had done, the work that had been neglected for 30 years, while Corwin's fear had kept keepers from existing. The pack felt it. Senna knew they felt it because she felt their response through the bonds themselves. Surprise giving way to relief. Relief giving way to something that felt like collective exhaling. Like a pack that had been holding tension in its shoulders for decades finally being allowed to relax. When the light faded, when the stone's song quieted to a low, pleasant hum, Senna was still standing in the circle with Corvain's hand in hers and the raven on her shoulder, and every wolf in the pack staring at her with expressions of wonder. Elder Moira stepped forward. Tears were running down her weathered face unchecked. "The keeper has returned," Moira said. Her voice shook with joy. "The bonds are whole, the old ways are remembered. The pack is complete." The assembled wolves began to howl, not in grief or challenge, but in celebration. The sound rose into the cold, clear air, hundreds of voices joining in a harmony that had not been heard at Stonehaven in 30 years. Senna felt it echo through the territorial bonds, felt the land itself respond, the trees and streams and mountains adding their own voices to the chorus until the entire territory was singing. She looked at Corvain. He was smiling, really smiling. The kind of smile that reached his eyes and transformed his whole face and made him look younger than she had ever seen him. "We did it," he said quietly, just for her. "We did," Senna agreed. The raven clicked its beak, the sound of approval, of satisfaction, of a job well done. The council convened immediately after the ceremony. Corwin stood before them without defense or excuse, and Corvain, as Alphaking, held the authority to pass judgment. "He should die," Senna said when asked. "By law and tradition, he has earned death. But death is easy. Death lets him escape consequences." She looked at the pack assembled around them. "I propose restorative justice," she said. "Corwin will step down from the council. He will confess publicly. He will spend the remainder of his life helping me rebuild the keeper traditions he tried to erase, teaching the young, making sure no one else makes his mistakes." Some wolves protested, others nodded slowly. But Corvain raised his hand. "The keeper has spoken," he said with alpha authority. "In matters of territorial healing, the keeper's word is law. This is the old way." Corwin fell to his knees, weeping with grief that had been held inside for 30 years. "I am sorry," he said. "Elara, I am sorry. Beta Ashwood, I am sorry. Senna, I am sorry." Senna knelt beside him, placed one hand on his shoulder. "I know," she said quietly. "And now you will spend the rest of your life proving it." Later that evening, as the pack began to disperse, Isolde found Senna at the Standing Stones. "I am leaving tomorrow," Isolde said, "to travel, to find out who I am when I am not performing." Senna clasped her wrist. "When you return, there will be a place for you here. Not as your father's daughter, as yourself. I will hold you to that, Isolde said, and walked away with her head high. 1 year later, Senna stood at her parents' graves. Spring had come early and wildflowers covered the ground. The raven perched on her father's headstone, watching her with amber eyes. I did it, Senna said quietly. Everything you wanted for me. I am a keeper. I am mated to the alpha. I am healing the pack. She paused. I trained 3 young keepers this winter. Corwin helps with the training. It is hard, but he is good at teaching them from his mistakes. She smiled. I am happy. I am happy and whole, and I take up space in the world without apologizing for it. She placed her hand on her mother's gravestone, felt the cool granite warm under her palm. Thank you, she whispered, for choosing me, for choosing life even when it cost you your own. The raven spread its wings, not the dramatic display from the ceremony, something quieter, more personal. And then it did something it had never done before. It flew away from her. Not far, just to the nearest tree where it perched and looked back at her. Senna understood. The raven had protected her until she was strong enough to stand alone, and now she was strong enough. You can go, Senna said. If you need to, I will be all right. The raven tilted its head, made the soft sound it only made for her, and Senna felt through her keeper senses that the raven was not leaving, just giving her space, trusting that she could be alone without being lost. Footsteps behind her, Corvain's quiet steps. He came to stand beside her, one hand resting on her shoulder. Are you ready? He asked. Yes, Senna said. They had a council meeting, young keepers to recognize, a neighboring pack requesting help, the constant work of healing and building. Senna took one last look at her parents' graves, at the wildflowers, at the raven watching from its branch, at the forest whispering with old agreements and new promises. Then she turned away, took Corvain's hand, walked back towards Stonehaven Keep with her mate beside her and her shadow stretching long across ground that knew her name. She was not invisible anymore. She never would be again. And the raven, watching from its tree, spread its wings once more in approval before settling them and turning its amber gaze toward the future, toward the work that still needed doing, toward the next keeper who would need guidance and the ones who would come generations from now. When Senna's story had become legend and her name had joined her mother's in the long memory of the land, the bonds were whole, the keeper had returned, and the silence, after 22 years, had finally been broken by truth.